All right, why don't we get started? So welcome to all of our CJDF fellows and our guests as well. We're excited for this next iteration of our seminar series for CJDF, and it's my pleasure to introduce Nick Hand, who's one of our Climate Justice Design Fellowship mentors, who's been working with Carlos. He's going to give our seminar today. Nick is currently the director of the Finance Policy and Data Unit in the Office of the City Controller in Philadelphia, and he's got a long history of applying data science to public policy and also teaching others how to do the same. He's an expert in data visualization and predictive analytics, and he's an advocate for transparency in government. And he has been teaching a geospatial data science course for master's students at UPenn. Nick earned his PhD in astrophysics from UC Berkeley, where he was a NSF graduate research fellow studying the large-scale structure of the universe. And this is where I got to know Nick more than a decade ago now through his work in science communication, when he was a student author for our writing collaborative Astrobytes, which enlists astronomy graduate students to write accessible summaries of astrophysical research. And today, Nick is going to feature some of his work and his thinking on how to tell stories using data and how to use those stories to inform and to influence policymakers and the public. So without further ado, I'll turn to you, Nick. Thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for that very nice introduction. Let me just share my screen, and then I will hit play here. And hopefully everyone can see that.
Yes.
Good. Perfect. Yeah. So as Nathan said, well, first off, welcome everyone. I hope you're somewhere where it's a little bit cooler than the 100 degrees it is here in Philadelphia. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about data visualization and data design and how I kind of use those and leverage those in my day job, which is in the local government here in Philadelphia. In the city controller's office. So let me start off with what is the controller's office, just as a baseline here. Not many people know what it is. I didn't know what it was before I discovered this. Oh, here's a new position. It sounds really interesting. So I joined this office 5 years ago. It is a local government, so it's a popularly elected position. The city controller right now is Rebecca Reinhardt. She's the first woman ever elected to the position. And they're the financial watchdog. Like 95% of the controller's office is they're auditors. They sort of audit the financial books of this of the local governments. And then there's my small little team. I sort of lead a data science team that looks at any policy issue that has a sort of a financial impact on the city. And so we're advocates for, accountability, transparency, accessibility. Historically, my team has been, I don't want to say boring, but they've sort of been focused on tax policy and doing some dry, in my opinion, a little bit dry analyses. But when Rebecca, the current controller, came in, she really wanted to kind of broaden that and leverage some more sort of, data science, some cutting edge tools, data visualization tools, and then also brought in to look at, not just kind of financial tax policy, but also anything that really has a social impact for Philadelphians, things that, everyday residents, things that affect their daily lives, things that sort of the large issues that residents are thinking about, right? So we really kind of took that, and I sort of ran with it, and we've done a lot of different things, as you'll see. Today, I'll sort of talk about a few different examples from our work, but we've really covered kind of a broad range of things in the past few years. So, as Nathan said, I am also a recovering astrophysicist, recovering academic, and just an interesting story, I think, to start with of how I kind of landed in my role with the city controller's office, and then my role at Penn in their Masters of Urban Spatial Analytics program. And the answer, as all things are, is Twitter. It all comes back to Twitter. So I had just graduated from with my PhD in astrophysics, was sort of taking some time off, not actively looking for jobs, and wanted to learn some new website development skills, do some open data analytics. We're sort of just messing around. And also didn't want to get a parking ticket. I was recently back in Philadelphia, didn't want to get a parking ticket, wanted to figure out where the best place to park without getting a ticket was. I was living in an area where street parking was pretty limited. And I took this open data set of parking tickets in Philadelphia and analyzed and built this dashboard where you have all of these different kind of cross filters where you can look at trends by time and by day and by zip code, and tweeted about it. And I didn't have a good Twitter. I had like 17 followers. Somehow the city, the chief data officer for the city saw it, and I was hired by the city like the next week. And I know that that's not a typical story probably, but I will say, just in terms of of advocating for yourself on Twitter, hey, who knows? Tweet it out, the cool stuff that you guys are doing. Who knows what's going to happen? So I landed in the controller's office and kind of hit the ground running and started building these sorts of dashboards for the city as well. And I want to talk about this. So if you go to parkingjohn.com, you should see. There we go, parkingjohn.com. You should see and play around with it. You should be able to see like filter and things, right? And see trends. So like the local paper wrote about it, and it was, if you're trying to not get a ticket in a specific neighborhood, you can kind of see the trends around what's going on. And the reason I sort of want to talk about this is because there we go, it really kind of encapsulates a lot of what I try to think about in terms of design and presenting data in an interesting way. This is more of an exploratory data visualization, and it really, you're trying to kind of empower the user to try to find its own trends, find these insights. And I love this sort of cross filtering that you can do across multiple dimensions of the data, trying to identify which dimensions of the data set are most interesting and try to extract out those insights. So this is just a screenshot of you're looking at the filters by time. You see that there were no parking tickets, January 23rd to the 25th in 2016. And you see it very clearly in the data. Then you try to figure out what exactly happened that day. And you look it up and it's, well, okay, it was a giant snowstorm. I think we got like 20 inches. So obviously no parking tickets those days. So this is, a data set of hundreds of thousands of parking tickets. You can't sort of do that. Can't put it in Excel and look through it manually. You got to use these kinds of visualizations to be able to find those insights and find what's interesting about it. All right, so I'm going to start with the first part here, just a very brief, so maybe some brief philosophy, some background on data viz, how I think about data viz and design. And then in the second half, I'll get into some kind of more concrete examples of exactly kind of what, how we apply those every day in the controller's office. So I'll start with some cartoons. This is a cartoon that I love, that I think it does a pretty good job kind of with the broader landscape of data visualization right now. These are the so-called 7 kinds of data viz people. There's the people sort of starting in the upper left, the people who have been doing Excel since the beginning of time, and they'll do everything in Excel, and they do all sorts of things that I could never do. More recently, there's this sort of Tableau movement where they have their like Tableau Iron Chef competitions. It's a whole thing. And if you're good at Tableau, it's certainly sort of it's a remarkable tool. The Italians, what they call the Italians here, those are the sort of making data visualization for the beauty of the data visualization itself. Very concerned with aesthetics. There's the media, sort of static media, the New York Times, producing things for the newspaper. There's the industry, which, Facebook, Uber, Netflix have these great visualization teams internal, but you can't really talk about it if you work there, and those skill sets don't really, that progress made by those teams doesn't really filter out often into the broader visualization landscape. The fun freelancers, those are the people who are just they're sort of pushing the boundary of visualization. They're making some really interesting things. And then finally, I think where I fall, most of I would say the people in the fellowship, right? Data scientists, you're doing some analysis. You're trying to impact policy. You're trying to present your data in a way where you can kind of tell a story and have an impact on society, right? And also from this blog post, which I thought was funny, was this example of what we're trying to avoid as a data scientist doing data visualization. So this is a climate graph from 1999, a relatively I would say famous graph from that paper, where this is a sort of just a mess of a data from a data visualization point of view, just a mess of a chart. There's there's 3 different colors. There's no legend, there's no labels, there's no annotations really. There's the double axis, which is always difficult, and then they made one axis green, which I'm assuming is the green line. There's just a lot going on here, right? And I think too often the data visualization part of it, the visualization design parts of a workflow of a project are sort of an afterthought. And if this chart had been a little bit clearer, I'm not saying the climate crisis would have been solved, but maybe we would have been doing a little bit better. I don't know. It's hard to say. So I think of data visualization as a communication form, right? It's a communication, it's a design problem. And typically I sort of group them into 2 different modes, fast and slow. And they are sort of what they sound like. So fast visualization is, you're either trying to produce the visualization quickly or you're trying to get people to understand it quickly, right? And the sort of classic trope is that you're making a dashboard or a report for some busy executives, and they have to understand it in 30 seconds, or you've kind of failed at your job, right? And I think this is kind of becoming the more prominent type of visualization and data sort of design. I'm not blaming Tableau for this, but I think Tableau has sort of influenced this a little bit, where you can kind of fire up Tableau and have a dashboard ready in just a few minutes. So before you kind of get to that step, I like to sort of take a step back and think about the design process, think about what the chart is saying and communicating, beyond what this is sort of immediately clear from it. Colors, design choices, those are all really meaningful and impactful things that you can do when you're kind of designing data visualization. So here's an example of a graphic from 2011 that actually I think won the Pulitzer Prize, or won a prize. This is a chart of fatalities in the Iraq War, going from sort of 2002 to 2011. And there are some, it definitely has it evokes a reaction, right? And there are some very obvious sort of design choices that the author made here. And there's a great way of seeing those, where you can undo the design choices that this person made, and it creates a sort of very different chart, right? So the title, instead of Iraq's bloody toll, just sort of deaths on the decline, right? So if you look at this, deaths are, if you go forward in time, actually going down over time. So if that's the point that you wanted to emphasize, you could change the title to deaths on the decline. You flipped it upside down, it no longer looks like blood dripping down the chart, which definitely changes the reaction. So the orientation changes, and then the color, right? So it's sort of this neutral blue or green versus the red that was used, right? So there is definitely just sort of to drive home the point, when you're thinking about designing a dashboard, a visualization, presenting information, you can absolutely, you're sort of always telling a story. You always have some sort of takeaway for the viewer. And you can kind of tweak what you want that to be based on your design choices. And so, with great power comes great responsibility. If data is really sort of always kind of telling, always kind of has a point of view, That means your design choices matter. And more recently, data visualization has never really been as important, I think, than it has now since the pandemic began. And we've seen all sorts of just terrible data visualizations that mislead people and confuse people. This is just one example. And the short sort of upshot here is that you should probably always avoid circles when you're doing data visualization. That's just a rule of thumb that I like to live by. But this is breakthrough cases for vaccinations in LA County. And you see the big circle here is supposedly 4.8 million. And then the green one, and the purple one is supposedly 6,500. So something has gone horribly awry because the ratio of those areas is not correct, not even close to being correct. So if you do the math there, the visualization should look more like this in terms of fidelity of areas tracking the actual numbers being presented in the graph. So that just goes to show that if you take nothing else away from this, just circles are bad if you're doing data visualization. That's my one piece of advice. And as I ramble here, please interrupt me if you have questions, thoughts. I want to say a little bit about some just resources in terms of data design and visualization that could be helpful. Things that I go back to over and over again. The first is just a good style design, a visualization design. The City of London has one that I really like. It has sort of design principles. It talks about sort of practical steps to improve clarity and improve visualizations, but it has a bunch of colors and color maps and other resources in it. It's really a fantastic resource. One that I really do enjoy and go back to. Policy Viz, if you haven't seen it, is another good one. They have a whole sort of cheat sheet of sort of data visualization rules. I've condensed it down to two that I try to focus on a lot, which is really kind of trying to show the data and draw the viewer's attention to the data that matters. And make sure that the viewer is really looking at what you want them to look at and taking away what you want them to take away. And then less is more. So there was this famous term coined by Edward Tufte called chart junk. All this sort of extra stuff that you don't need. If it's not if it's not really a requirement to get your point across, you should really remove it if it's just sort of extra flair. And I like to just illustrate chart junk by the two Wikipedia charts that show up on the Wikipedia entry for chart junk. These are about the worst. Someone I'm sure had a lot of fun making these for the Wikipedia, but there's all sorts of extra things here that that not only you don't need, but make it harder to understand what's the information that's being presented. So if you're ever using on the right here, if you're ever using gradients, just don't do that. That's another key piece of advice. I would also frown, stay away from the black and red stripes if you can. Just things to think, rules to live by here. Okay, so like I said, there's many more resources out there. This is just a screenshot of the Policy Viz cheat sheet. And two things on here that I want to call your attention to in terms of the design process. I always start with thinking about who's the audience here, and what are we trying to kind of, how can we best tailor our visualization for that particular audience. And then this idea of form and function. So is the visualization going to be more static or more interactive? Is sort of a key decision to make in the beginning, and then is it going to be more explanatory or more exploratory, right? So is it going to be like Parking John, where you can kind of explore the different dimensions, or something more explanatory where you're trying to walk the viewer through something? That's Policy Viz. This is Financial Times. They have a great open source visualization kind of library. This is what they call their visual vocabulary that walks through all of the different ways to visualize data, depending on what kind of data you have and what you're trying to visualize, basically. So really interesting sort of resource that I go back to quite a lot as well. Okay, cool. So I'm going to spend the second half of sort of the remaining time talking about mistakes that we've made and sort of lessons learned. So I'm going to have some examples of trying to apply, these guidelines and things that I've talked about so far. How we try to leverage those in the City of Philadelphia local government to try to have an impact on policy. So a few lessons I've learned and things that kind of want to talk about a little bit more detail. First, just focusing on clarity and simplicity. This is partly because of my job, my role. We're talking to residents primarily. Our audience is primarily Philadelphians. And the average reading level in Philadelphia is quite low. So we really do always kind of put a focus on clarity and simplicity. It doesn't mean that we can't do more complex things. It's just trying to make things as understandable as possible. The second guideline here is sort of try to think about what's a valuable data set, what's a data set sort of maybe of public interest, maybe a data set that is not accessible at the moment, and how can we make that more accessible and kind of reach more people with that information. Dashboards, the third one here, dashboards are great, but you really do have to be careful with how you design them, how you deploy them. They definitely have a great use case, but a lot of times people are just sort of making dashboards to make dashboards. And then if you're telling a good story with data, context is crucial. And in my role, it's really been historical context a lot of the times, but just context around the data that you're putting out there is really, really crucial. All right, so the first example here, focusing on clarity and simplicity. This is from the first ever visualization I made for the city controller's office in Philadelphia. It was my boss asked me for a pie chart, and I said I hate pie charts. Could I do a donut chart and also a bar chart? The human brain sort of has really hard is not really built to analyze to like sort of figure out the if there's more than 3 or 4 wedges in a pie chart, the human brain really can't tell them apart. So I won some middle ground on like my third day. So I got a bar chart added as well. But this is the Philadelphia beverage tax at the time. This is back in, I guess, early 2018. It had just been passed. It's a tax on sugary beverages here in Philadelphia, and it was intended to the revenue from that tax intended to fund specific early education pre-K programs and then community school education programs. So it was tied to the revenue was tied to specific education-based programs. So we put out this chart. I think we tweeted it out one day. And just looking at where the money had gone so far, and you can see most of it had just 30 million, 76% had gone to the general fund. That means it's just sitting in the city's main account unused. So the takeaway here is that most of it hadn't been used yet. But I guess we did a good job, because people freaked out when we put this out. It got like way more press coverage than anything else that we had ever done, or for quite a while would do in the future. And it was just a simple sort of bar chart and donut chart. But clear labeling, consistent coloring in the two charts. It's not sort of overwhelming you with the information here, but people, the local media here really caught on. And I will say that it was just sort of shortly after this that the mayor actually stopped talking to my boss. We have a very contentious relationship. We are with a watchdog. So I guess this sort of, you never sort of know what your visualization is going to do. but it sort of made things a little bit harder for our office, but it really did kind of catch on, and we then pushed the sort of, in response, the mayor's administration kind of had to produce more information regarding where these, how their plan to spend this money, and how is it going to be actually be directed towards the programs that they said they were going to direct it to. So since then, we've taken that kind of static, bar chart and donut chart and turned it into a sort of an interactive dashboard, where, as we'll see, so we have the context here up front. I'll talk about that in a little bit, but then you have sort of interactive charts where you can see, you can choose what you're looking for, choose the year, and so on. So we've kind of evolved over time, but it started with something just relatively simple, just a bar chart and pie chart or donut chart of what we're looking for, of the data. Okay, so then finding the second sort of guideline I want to talk about, finding valuable data sets, making them more accessible. Sort of how to find the right data is, I think, a really key point for storytelling with data. And in sort of my role, I've had sort of two examples of that. And one, both of these are kind of data sets that were inaccessible, but had a lot of public interest in them. And how we could then go and try to, tell a good story based on the fact that, people did care about this, but they just weren't able to maybe, for whatever reason, understand or access that particular data. So the first, we are the financial watchdog. We deal a lot with budget documents. In this case, it's sort of financial, it's sort of cash levels, right? So how much the city kind of has on cash they have in their main accounts. This could be, a budget for a sort of environmental organization. It really, budget documents are very similar across organizations, right? They are large PDFs that most people don't know how to understand or read. And very few examples are out there of kind of accessible budget information that's in a format that is usable and can provide people with the sort of insights to go out and have a policy impact. So this is one of the sort of 60 or 70 pages in this report that they put out. The city puts out quarterly is the revenues and their spending by category. So it's sort of exactly what the city is, how much tax money they're getting and what they're spending that tax payer dollars on. And it's in this wonderful little table format that is just a joy to read every time that I have to look at it. And we saw that and we saw, okay, well, this is really interesting information. We're getting down to sort of the meat of what the city is, how the city is spending taxpayer money. We have this information that's quarterly. It gives us sort of almost a close to sort of real-time update on how the city is spending taxpayer money. Let's see what we can do with it. So we then turn this into kind of an interactive chart, an interactive report that we would do every quarter, where we have now kind of digitized that PDF and extracted out the data from it. I do spend a lot of my time extracting data from PDFs. So if you happen to want to talk about that at some point, I spent too much of my life doing that, unfortunately, but have gotten relatively good at it. And so we now have these sort of interactive reports where we have, this is how much money the city actually has on hand. And you can see, thanks to the American Rescue Plan, the city in its main account here has over $2.3 billion just in their main account. Way more money than they've ever had in their cash account. That is not necessarily how the local government talks about their finances at the moment. They talk about their finances, that they have to be very careful with the money they're spending. We're still recovering from the pandemic, but in actuality, the story is very different, that they actually have money for social programs or money to invest in better climate resilience or anything sort of that people want them to. So we're trying to provide the sort of residents and activists and groups or nonprofits with the tools, the information that is kind of buried in these PDFs, but is super important. Second example is a kind of a similar idea. The data was very accessible, but there was a lot of public interest around it. So this is a data set here of asbestos repair projects in Philadelphia. This is actually all Philadelphia buildings they're required to, the city is required to put out this information. And it was in this sort of very weirdly formatted HTML table that was very hard to use. And you also just couldn't download it. You had to look at it in this weird format. So we got a lot of complaints or really maybe requests for a more usable format for this data, and thought about what is the kind of interesting piece of this data set. And we have this, we have asbestos removal projects for all Philadelphia buildings. Very difficult to understand. We first step just kind of cleaned it and downloaded it, and that's sort of the technical side of things. But then on the design side of things, well, we sort of thought, what's the most interesting aspect of this data set? And what we came up with is asbestos repair projects in school buildings in sort of the Philadelphia school district. So then we kind of set out to match the sort of messy data with data on school buildings and present it in a much more usable and accessible way. So we're kind of combining multiple data sets here in a new way in order to make something that's much more useful for residents. So at the end of the day, we ended up with a map, a dashboard here that looks like this, where the sizes of the sizes of the circles indicate all of the number of repair projects that have happened, and then it links to all of the information that we have. This is the information from that table. And then if you're so inclined, you could click, and I think this should still work. It will take a second because the system is really low, but you can click back to the original, there's a link there to the original website with all the original information. So now we have parents, we have activists who use this to figure out what's going on in their child's school district or in a school or other schools around the city, where there are sort of issues with this sort of harmful asbestos, because the school buildings are all quite old, and they all have asbestos, and trying to get a handle on when those that harmful material is being removed. All right, so let me go back to the presentation. So that was my last example there. So there's two more sort of guidelines I want to talk about before I wrap up. So the third one overall here, deploying dashboards with care. I think a lot of the time, dashboards, because dashboarding has become so easy and the tools out there have become so good, to be honest, you can create dashboards without that kind of sort of skipping the design process. And I just think that the design process, just to emphasize sort of the key pointer, very important to think about kind of the information you're presenting and how you're presenting it. So the example I kind of want to talk about is a dashboard that we put together back in 2019, prior to the pandemic, focused on gun violence and the city's gun violence crisis and the number of shooting victims in the city. And this was prior to the pandemic, when we saw an even larger rise in gun violence in the city. And that has continued in 2022. So 2021 had the most homicides in Philadelphia's history, and we are slightly above that pace, unfortunately, in 2022. So we had actually put this dashboard out in 2019, and didn't get all that much traction or use. Until actually the pandemic, and with the sort of unprecedented rise, there was a lot of public interest in in solutions to the gun violence crisis, tracking how the progress that was being made by the city. And the city was releasing information around shooting victims, but the information, it really required technical knowledge to be able to use it and download it and analyze it. And we wanted to present that in because it was such a large public interest around it, wanted to put something out that that had was just much more understandable and accessible. And the design process around this for us is, we wanted to identify the dimensions of the data that were of most sort of public interest. We wanted to use kind of interactive cross filtering to make it make easy exploration for people, to identify our kind of own insights. What we thought the most important things were about the data, and try to map and include filters and things where you could where you could easily kind of see those insights from the data, and then summarize and highlight the most important trends. So in practice, what this means is, gun violence is highly concentrated, both in people and in places. So we knew we wanted to have a main map component to the data visualization, focused on kind of the geospatial trends. The demographic data, we absolutely knew we needed to include and sort of highlight the racial justice aspect of gun violence, and the sort of the public health crisis in certain in majority minority communities in the city. We added in arrest information to sort of track accountability, in terms of the police, how many of these incidents were being solved. And then we knew from sort of recent trends that there was some alarming trends around more victims who were female, more victims who were under the age of 17, younger victims in and around shootings in and around schools, in the sort of after school period. So we also knew we wanted to add some filters to kind of track these trends in these subgroups. So this is sort of where we're trying to see the insights for ourselves and then build a data visualization that is able to kind of communicate those insights. All right, so then here is the actual dashboard itself, right? We have the map component, and then we have all of these filters where you can see gender, race, ethnicity, day of the week, time of the day, date and age. So you can filter along any of these dimensions, and the data will update on the map. And then there's a component here where we're sort of summarizing the key trends along each of these dimensions, along age, race, ethnicity, things like that. So let me just pull it up real quick. And again, so we're looking here, right? So if we're looking at fatal shootings only, the map sort of updates itself here, updates the bar charts update automatically. So we're cross filtering each of the sort of data set that's currently being viewed. So let's say we pick everything from since July 1st, maybe. So we're filtering by date, and then I pick by age as well. And you can see these are and it sort of allows users to zoom in on specific cases, specific subsets of the data set. And that's what we found has been really useful in terms of people working, if maybe people are working on an issue that they're sort of they run a youth outreach program and they're concerned about shootings in a specific time period or specific neighborhood. It has been really useful for nonprofit groups across the city, people who are trying to impact policy and design better programming to kind of sort of make progress on the issue. So those are the kinds of things that we've been sort of thinking about as we're trying to design the dashboard. And let me go back. So we put this dashboard out, and there was really one piece of it that we thought was lacking, one piece of context that was lacking. And if you look at that dashboard, you might sort of get the takeaway that there are that this is someone else's issue. It doesn't affect me, maybe in Center City. It doesn't affect me. I'm not interested in it, right? And there was some really crucial historical context that was lacking. So really to tell a complete story and to really to have the impact in terms of that we wanted, that we needed to provide some historical context around it. So that we actually paired the dashboard with a sort of a deep dive into the legacy of structural racism and redlining in Philadelphia. And the takeaway was the challenges faced by Philadelphia today are not were sort of caused by policies that were enacted nearly 100 years ago. This policy of redlining that then persisted and sort of created this cycle of disinvestment where because of these federal policies that basically prevented Black residents and residents of color from owning homes and participating in wealth building. They kind of led to this cycle of disinvestment in terms of over decades, jobs, lack of jobs, sort of depopulation, these sort of compounding issues that have then led to these areas of concentrated disadvantage in our city and met most cities across most of urban centers across the US. So we felt it was really important to kind of add that context and tell that story. So we tied it to we sort of paired the dashboard with this context where we're seeing, yes, homicides are concentrated in the city, but they're also concentrated in areas where, as part of this redlining, the federal government sort of considered these areas, hazardous or declining, just because there were people, there were Black residents and people of color living in those areas in the 1930s, right? So that was nearly a century ago, but still having this impact, this correlation with what's going on today. And it was not only sort of gun violence, but it's poverty, it's disadvantage today. It's also environmental issues. So redlined areas have higher present day rates of asthma. They are also areas, sort of hazardous sites are also more likely to be in areas of that were redlined in the 1930s. And then right, and that's because these sort of redlined areas were considered by the federal government sort of not worthy of investment. So it became easier to put industrial sites there. It became easier to put hazardous sites there. And then lastly, right, street trees, right? This is something the city can do. The city can do, the city has put street trees and they've actually just started a sort of 10-year plan to kind of combat some of these issues. But on the left there, you can see street trees are really concentrated in Center City, West Philly, kind of University City. These are wealthier areas. These are whiter areas of the city. And then if you make a map of just the temperature on a summer day in Philadelphia and a sort of average day, you can see what you do when you sort of do that analysis, that the red line neighborhoods are hotter in the summer. I think it's something like 9 or 10 degrees hotter. So you have these sort of urban heat islands in primarily redlined neighborhoods in the city, where they're like that because of the sort of cycle of the sort of decades of structural racism. So that was sort of a very important kind of story that we wanted to tell, along with the gun violence dashboard, to really drive home the point that this is an issue that the government caused, and we're a local government office, and it's up to the local government really to recognize that and to create solutions for moving forward for those problems. Again, sort of going back to what do you want to take away? What do you want the message to be, and how do you tweak and design your data visualizations to drive those points home? All right, and with that, I think I will wrap up. So things to strive for, always think about what your data viz is telling us, sort of the main point here. What's the takeaway? What's the story you're trying to communicate? Data visualization is really a communication and design problem. And sort of my best advice, focus on clarity and simplicity. Think about data sets that are interesting, but maybe not accessible to a wide audience at the moment. Be very careful with dashboards. Design process and dashboards is crucial. And then really to have the biggest impact and to tell a good story, you really need that context. Make sure you're not missing things in terms of presenting the full picture. And with that, I will say thank yous. And I will love if there are questions.
Thank you so much, Nick. Fantastic presentation. I think really well timed. Trying to think about what it looks like to plot data that's relevant for them and think about their audience at the start of their project. I've got a softball question for you to start. You planted a seed asking if we might ask you how you deal with PDFs, what tools you use. So I was wondering if you could tell us more about how you extract data from PDFs.
Nathan, I think I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, now.
I'm sorry about that. I was just wondering how you extract data from PDFs.
Oh, yes. So give me 1 second. Yes, so there are a couple of tools. So I typically do it in Python, and there's a wonderful Python package called Camelot that will do that for you. The one that I got started with is Tabula. They have a great sort of interface, web interface, where you can kind of upload a PDF and choose how to extract your what sort of area you want to extract, and it extracts it out to an Excel file, and it feels like magic. So Tabula is great, and then Python. There's a number of ones in Python, but Camelot is my favorite.
Is that what you used for the tree canopy with the purple? The coloring was striking on that one. The shades.
So that's in Python as well, and that is so I do all my things in Matplotlib in Python, which I don't know if I recommend. It's painful, but there are, in terms of those, if you're working in I typically recommend R for visualization, even though I do most of my stuff in Python. But then there are, I think the tools, I've played around a little bit with the glue library that you guys, the sort of technical sort of team is also working with. That's fantastic. And then but I do most of my stuff in sort of directly in Python.
And when you made your parking dashboard, what is that with?
That was with so the whole goal of that was to learn JavaScript. So that's in straight JavaScript.
And you just taught yourself to do it and made that dashboard.
I did, yes.
That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah, that was the point. And then it was a bit of a struggle, but then I did finish it, and then I was not expecting people to actually look at it. So.
Can I ask a little bit about the process once you issue the reports in terms of getting feedback, both, I guess, or maybe during the process also, do you solicit feedback as you're designing them for forms of legibility, and then afterwards, how does that play into the process?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So it varies based on the sort of project and things, but typically, we do meet with sort of activists and community members who are interested in the whatever the product is, and kind of solicit their feedback around what they're looking for, what would be useful for them. A lot of the times or a lot of times they're coming to us with ideas, and we're working directly like that. But I think one of the kind of interesting things, we are the sort of the accountability office. There are a lot of challenges in Philadelphia. But when we kind of make these dashboards or visualizations or reports, when we talk to community members, they say, yeah, well, I know that, of course I know that gun violence is a serious issue. Like in my, like on that block, there's been 7 shootings in the past 2 weeks or something. Right. But now they say, but now I can kind of go out and I have the backup, right? I have a local government office saying that there's an issue and that, if you invest in these programs, things will get better. Or if you direct monies like that in this particular way, it'll get better. So they kind of see it as a tool to kind of leverage and back up what their like lived experience is. And that's, I think, one of the things that we try to aim for. I don't know if that answers your question. It's just
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. It's helpful. And have you gotten a parking ticket?
I did get a parking ticket, yeah. But then
did it work with the data? Was your lived experience?
No, it was. I tried to fight. I was upset about it. I thought about fighting it, but you can't fight the PPA, so I just paid the ticket. Carlos, I have a ticket right
Nice.
there. I also tried to fight a parking ticket and I got the motion denied.
Yeah,
for me.
I'm
trying to get reverted. So I'm between like just taking it to the whatever admin court or just paying it. But it's really annoying.
Yeah, parking tickets are it's like 97%. The appeal rate is not very good.
I was going to ask, so you mentioned, I think it was on the school asbestos map about updating, and was that one updated daily? Is that what it said on there?
Yeah, so both,
and I guess, yeah, my question was more, do you have someone that is like constantly updating data, or is it pulling from somewhere so it's automated? And then do you have advice when it is like a manual entry kind of thing, just making sure that, like, I think with a lot of our projects, it probably will be a little more on the manual side, and making sure that we're giving accurate data and I guess, not skewing information because we're not able to update things in real time.
Yeah, those are fantastic questions. So both the asbestos map and the gun violence map, they update daily. For the shooting victims, that is the police actually release an updated daily. That's a manual process. They input their the investigations from the previous day. On the asbestos, the underlying sort of database is updated daily, and then we have to kind of clean it and upload it and match it daily. There are a lot of like technical options now to do that. So I actually do everything for free, open source on GitHub. They have now with their, I think what they call their GitHub actions, you can run any piece of code at a specific time daily with as long as it's an open source code and repository, then you can, the limits in terms of like computing power and all those sorts of things are quite low, are quite generous. So we do everything for free with open source tools in our office. And so I think that's options like that where you can automate, some tools and things like that. I think that are really powerful. If it is a manual process, I think it's updated manually, maybe on a sort of frequency that's not daily. I think the biggest thing that I have kind of seen in the past is you sort of don't realize that more up-to-date data is available, maybe, or if things kind of fall by the wayside, particularly like as you like move on with your life and there are other things, right? You want this to live in the future, right? So I've had a lot of success actually with using sort of this automated features on GitHub to basically like check if it's coming from an original data source, like check if that data source has been updated. and then like maybe send me an email or maybe do something where I'll see that alert, and then go and check it and say, okay, now we can update things like that. So yeah, the manual process is harder, and sort of just making it clear on the dashboard that when, like, sourcing when the data is from, things like that.
How do you approach the context, establishing the right context as you are building these data sets and developing infographic content that is external facing? I know you mentioned engaging with stakeholders, community leaders, etc. But do you have is there a way that the office you work with handles that part? And I say it because in past roles I have seen how folks in environmental conservation space, just to give an example, have taken greening practices in urban, in cities and urban settings, and data from those, from greening and revamping abandoned lots, and have also taken crime data and made a wrongful correlation between how greening spaces lowers quote unquote criminal activity, and we're presenting that data as if the two were connected and trying to fundraise and say that those are strategies that they were pursuing, which is very problematic.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So this is one of the areas where I was probably the biggest, coming from academia, sort of one of the biggest surprises for me, where it was sort of not necessarily the well, just generally speaking, maybe the politics of everything, right? And around policy. And we, I was kind of coming from the mindset, well, I'll make a chart, it'll be clear, or I'll make a visualization, it'll be clear, and everyone will be on board, and the data will speak for itself, and we'll create that policy, and life will be great. But yeah, everyone has a sort of point of view, and that's where sort of you're always, the same data can be presented in very different ways to tell different stories. So in our office, we have a wonderful our first deputy. So our deputy controller is luckily sort of handles that aspect of it, right? So handles the, like, are we missing pieces of important context? Are we people who are talking to community stakeholders? Do they have a very specific point of view that they would like to see? And we've sort of almost separated out a little bit, where my team will lead the sort of what we think the objective and takeaways are, based with that input. But then there's almost sort of like a firewall there, where we're trying not to skew our analysis too much in a particular way, if that makes sense. But it's a challenge, right? I don't think there's I would not say that's what we're doing is particularly good, but it's certainly a huge challenge.
All right, well, we're just a little bit past 5, so excellent timing. Thank you, everybody, for the engaged questions. Nick, thank you again for a fantastic presentation. We have recorded this, we'll post it online to share with others. And Nick, of course, is staying engaged with us as a mentor and working with Carlos. So if anyone has follow-up questions, please feel free to let Joel know, and we can route those towards Nick, if you won't mind, Nick.
Yeah, no, of course. Happy to talk about anything in the talk, or more technical things, astrophysics, why circles are bad, anything at all. Parking tickets. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome, much appreciated. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yep. Thanks,
Okay.
everyone.
Bye.